Stickman has $4 and a dream. That's it. $4, a cracked phone screen, and a YouTube algorithm that just fed him a video titled, "I made 300,000 driving a truck with no degree." So naturally, he does what any broke 20-something would do. He closes the video, opens a calculator app, and starts doing math he has no business doing at 11 p.m. Here's the pitch that got him. Some guy in a trucker hat, sitting in the cab of a shiny Freightliner, says truck drivers can make $200,000 a year. No college, no boss breathing down your neck, just you, the highway, and a paycheck that makes your finance degree look like a bad investment. Stickman does not have a finance degree. Stickman does not have a degree at all. Stickman has a part-time job folding shirts and a growing suspicion that the entire economy was built to keep him poor. So he decides to actually find out. Not the YouTube version, not the recruiter version, where every ad promises up to some insane number that maybe one guy in Nebraska has ever hit. The real version. What does a truck driver actually take home, after everything, after fuel, after the truck payment? After the divorce, statistically speaking, because we're going to get into that too, let's start with the number that gets thrown around the most, because it's technically true and also almost completely useless. $200,000. That's a real number. Owner-operators, meaning drivers who own their own truck instead of driving for a company, really can gross somewhere between $200,000 and $250,000 a year. Gross. Write that word down, put a circle around it, because gross is the most misleading word in the entire trucking industry. Gross means the total amount of money that touches your bank account before anything gets taken back out. It's the number on the invoice. It is not, in any universe, the number you get to keep. And in trucking, the gap between gross and what you actually keep is not small. It's not a little tax here and there. It's closer to 70% of your income getting eaten alive by expenses before you even think about April 15th. So Stickman, still sitting there with his $4, starts breaking down where $200,000 actually goes when you're the one who owns the truck. First, fuel. A truck like a Freightliner doesn't sip gas, it inhales diesel. An owner-operator running seriously, meaning around 100 to 120,000 miles a year, is going to burn through tens of thousands of dollars in fuel alone. Just fuel. Before insurance, before maintenance, before anything. Then there's the truck payment itself, because unless you're buying a used rig in cash, which most people starting out are not doing, you're financing a truck that can run anywhere from $80,000 to $200,000, depending on whether it's new or used, sleeper cab or day cab. That's a monthly payment that doesn't care if freight rates are good or bad that month. It just wants its money. Add insurance. Commercial trucking insurance is not like insuring your Honda Civic. You're insuring a 40,000-pound vehicle that can, worst-case scenario, end someone's life or wipe out a company's entire fleet in a lawsuit. That insurance is expensive, and it gets more expensive if you're new, because insurance companies price risk, and a driver with 6 months of experience is a bigger risk than one with 10 years. Then maintenance. Tires on a semi-truck are not the $60 special from the tire shop down the street. A single tire can run several $100s, and a truck has 18 of them. Add oil changes, brake jobs, engine repairs that can run into the thousands if something major goes wrong. And you start to understand why so many owner-operators describe their first year as, quote, an expensive lesson in humility. Permits, tolls, parking, satellite tracking fees, dispatch fees if you're using a broker to find loads. It adds up to what the industry itself calls total operating costs. And depending who you ask, that number sits somewhere around $2.20 per mile once you count everything, including paying yourself as the driver. So here's what actually happens to that $200,000 gross number. After every single expense gets paid, the average owner-operator nets somewhere between $60,000 and $120,000 a year. Some sources put the real average, based on actual accounting data from thousands of real operators, closer to $65,000 net, not $200,000. $65,000. Stickman blinks at his phone. $65,000 is still real money. That's not nothing, but it's also not the yacht and early retirement number the thumbnail promised him at 11 p.m. And here's the part nobody puts in the thumbnail. That $65,000 isn't paid out for 40 hours a week either. Long-haul, over-the-road drivers regularly work 60 to 70 hours a week. Federal regulations legally cap actual driving time at 11 hours a day. But driving is only part of the job. There's loading and unloading, sitting at a dock waiting for your trailer to get filled while the clock keeps running on your life, but not necessarily on your pay. Fueling up, doing mandatory vehicle inspections, dealing with weigh stations, and sleeping in the truck itself for days or weeks at a time, depending on the route. Do the actual math on that. Take a $75,000 income and divide it by something closer to 3,500 working hours in a year. Once you count all the waiting and loading and non-driving time that still eats your day, and you land on something like $21 an hour. $21 an hour while sleeping in a cab, missing birthdays, missing holidays, and being away from everyone you know for stretches at a time. Suddenly, the math doesn't feel like the escape hatch from broke it looked like in the thumbnail. Now, Stickman is stubborn, so before he gives up on the trucking dream entirely, he checks the other path. What if he doesn't buy his own truck? What if he just drives for a company instead? No truck payment, no insurance bill with his name on it, no fuel budget keeping him up at night. This is where it actually gets more interesting, because company driving is a completely different financial animal than owning your rig. The median truck driver salary in the United States, according to the government's own labor statistics, sits right around $57,000 a year. That's the middle of the pack for all truck drivers combined. Everything from local delivery routes to long haul. Entry-level company drivers, the ones fresh out of CDL school with basically zero experience, are looking at something closer to $45,000 starting out. Some drivers on the lower end of the spectrum, doing local or regional routes with less demanding schedules, land under $40,000. But experienced drivers, especially ones hauling specialized freight, can clear $100,000 as a company driver, no truck payment required. Specialized freight is the magic phrase here. Hauling hazardous materials, operating a tanker truck, moving oversized loads that require escort vehicles and special permits. These all pay more per mile because fewer drivers are qualified or willing to do them. Most company drivers get paid by the mile, somewhere between 45 cents and 75 cents per mile depending on experience, with specialized loads pushing past 85 cents. So if you're driving 50,000 miles a year at 55 cents a mile, that's $27,500. Push that up to 100,000 miles a year, which is genuinely grueling, at 65 cents a mile, and you're at $65,000. The mileage is the entire game. More miles means more money, but more miles also means more time away from home, more fatigue, more risk. And here's the trade-off nobody puts in a thumbnail either. A company driver making $70,000 a year has zero truck payment, zero insurance liability, zero maintenance bill, and usually gets actual employer benefits, health insurance, sometimes a retirement match, paid time off. When you add the value of those benefits to the salary, a company driver at $70,000 can end up with a total compensation package that rivals an owner-operator, netting $85,000 minus all the stress of running your own business, on top of driving a truck for 70 hours a week. Stickman sits with that for a second. So owning the truck isn't automatically the better move. It's the higher ceiling, sure, but it's also the higher risk, the higher stress, and for a huge number of first-year owner-operators, actually the lower income, because year one is brutal across the board. Let's talk about year one specifically, because this is the part the recruiter ads conveniently skip. Starting an owner-operator business means eating startup costs nobody warns you about. The truck itself, if you're not paying cash, which almost nobody is. Getting your own operating authority, which is basically the legal permission slip to run your own trucking business instead of leasing under someone else's. Insurance binders that are more expensive when you have zero track record. A full month of fuel money before your first invoice even gets paid because freight brokers can take weeks to actually pay out. On top of the money problem, there's the experience problem. New owner-operators don't have relationships with good freight brokers yet. They're hunting on public load boards for whatever's available, which means more time spent hunting for work and less time actually driving loaded and making money. Plus, a much steeper learning curve on negotiating rates so you don't get lowballed. All of that combined means most first-year owner-operators net somewhere between $40,000 and $70,000, 30 to 50% below what an experienced operator with 3 years in makes running the exact same truck on the exact same roads. So, if Stickman decided tomorrow to drain his $4, take out a loan, and buy a Freightliner, year 1 would likely be his hardest financial year in recent memory, before things get better in year 2 and year 3 once the business actually stabilizes. Now here's a number that should genuinely worry anyone watching this hoping trucking is a guaranteed path to freedom. Total operating costs for running a truck have been climbing. Non-fuel operating costs, meaning everything besides diesel, hit record highs recently, driven by rising truck and trailer payment costs, rising insurance premiums, and rising repair costs. At the same time, freight rates, meaning what you actually get paid per load, went through a multi-year slump. The industry itself describes the current recovery as, quote, marginless, meaning rates are creeping up just enough to barely keep pace with inflation, not enough to make anyone feel like they're getting ahead. That's an important reality check. This isn't 2021. During the freight boom, when rates spiked and every trucking video on the internet was showing off owner-operators clearing insane numbers because demand was through the roof and drivers were scarce. Markets shift. What worked spectacularly 3 or 4 years ago is a much tighter, more competitive game today. So what's the actual verdict here? Is trucking, specifically owning your own Freightliner, the golden ticket out of being broke? The honest answer, the one that doesn't fit neatly on a thumbnail, is that trucking can absolutely build real wealth, but it looks nothing like what the recruiter ad promised. It looks like this. Year 1 is hard, financially tight, and full of expensive lessons about insurance rates and fuel costs and what happens when your transmission decides to die on a Tuesday in the middle of Wyoming. Year 2 and 3, if you survive year 1 without going broke, your costs stabilize, you build relationships with brokers who give you better freight consistently, and your net income climbs into a genuinely solid range, somewhere between $80,000 and $150,000 for the operators who actually run their business well, keep their truck moving instead of sitting empty, and stay disciplined about expenses instead of upgrading their truck the second they have a good month. Meanwhile, company driving is the safer, more boring, but statistically more reliable path for most people. You're not risking your own capital. You're not one blown engine away from a financial catastrophe. You get a steady paycheck, actual benefits, and if you push into specialized freight or take on more miles, a genuinely comfortable 6-figure income is achievable without ever owning a truck yourself. Stickman looks at his $4 one more time. He's not becoming a truck driver tomorrow. He doesn't even have a driver's license, if we're being honest, which nobody in this video has bothered to mention until right now. But what he does have is something more valuable than the fantasy he clicked on at 11 p.m. He has the actual math. And the math says this. Trucking is not a scam, and it's not a golden ticket either. It's a real job. A physically and mentally demanding one that can pay anywhere from $45,000 starting out as a company driver to well over $100,000 for experienced drivers or well-run owner-operators years into the business. But it demands 60 to 70-hour work weeks, time away from everyone you love, and if you go the owner-operator route, a genuine appetite for financial risk that most people watching a hype video at 11 p.m. are not actually prepared for. The people making the truly life-changing money in trucking are not the ones who bought one truck and drove it themselves. They're the ones who scaled. 2 or 3 trucks with hired drivers running under their business, and net income climbs into the $80,000 to $200,000 range, because now the business makes money whether or not any one person is physically behind the wheel. 5 or more trucks, and you're not really a truck driver anymore. You're running a small logistics company with net income that can push past $400,000 a year. But by that point, you're spending your time managing drivers, negotiating contracts, and handling business development, not sitting in a Freightliner cab watching the interstate go by. So which version of this story is the one selling the dream, and which one is the one that actually gets people rich? It's almost never the guy driving the truck alone. It's the guy who used driving the truck as the first step toward owning a fleet of them. Stickman closes his calculator app. $4 and a dream is not enough to buy a Freightliner tomorrow, but it might be enough to keep asking the same question about every single other so-called easy money method out there. Because if trucking, one of the most hyped-up blue-collar moneymakers on the internet, actually comes with this many hidden costs and this much fine print, what do you think is waiting under the hood of delivery driving, or dropshipping, or every other get-rich-without-a-degree video flooding your feed right now? Because Stickman's not done asking. Not even close.